it would take another lifetime to sort of translate it into literary theory or apply it or something like that. And use it as a method, or develop as a method, an interesting method, not a boring method, not a like mechanical method. So it's no easy thing, and we're just doing this. And then we're moving on to 10,000 other theories. So it's hard. And I totally am sympathetic. Jen, you were asking if people are putting their hands up. You can do either one. You can raise your hand, or you can raise your Zoom hand if you want. Or you can just shout. You can just mute yourself and shout it out. So anyways, yeah, I'm totally sympathetic with this difficulty of this material. Then when you turn to Lacan, you would be like, what the hell is this guy saying, and why is this important? And I have that same feeling, so let's go with it. But I wanted to say a thing to set it up, which is that maybe you could sort of, what is well known as Lacan is one of the major criticisms he has of, not exactly Freud, but Freudianism. So it's, Lacan is really flourishing in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and so on. A moment in which Freudianism has spread everywhere, right? And it's seeped into the culture, and all of the culture becomes Freudian. And it's sort of like popularized, but also, kind of a cheap way. Oh, yeah, everything's about sex, or the phallus, or everything is, that's what Freud means, right? And or everything's unconscious, or something like that. It's just like this really bad kind of spread of like cheap Freud. And Lacan, the second thing that is happening is that even in the psychoanalytic method, a certain kind of Freudianism is spreading, and it's often just called ego psychology. And the idea of an ego psychology is that it's just trying to really get people to refine their own ego, refine their own self, kind of make themselves whole if they have some problems that are sort of breaking them down or traumatizing them or blocking them. So refine, sort of escape from that and find like a kind of happy place, basically, would be ego psychology. And feel, and the role of a psychoanalysis or the analyst is to sort of bring that patient to that position. Okay. Well, the problem that Lacan has that instantly is that, okay, number one, that seems to describe like the bourgeois mentality or the middle class mentality, like, oh, everything should be fine and safe and good, and I should be happy with everything who I am, and so on and so forth. And problem solved. Like that's sort of like the whole point of life, is to achieve that kind of sense of self kind of satisfaction or something like that. And so it's very middle class in the sense that if that's the 1950s and you're just aligning yourself with the status quo, then you're going to align yourself with the sort of the system as it is. Maybe that system is part of the patriarchal, capitalist, and other issues, you could say. Of the 50s, 40s, 50s, and so on. Even if you were to say that ego psychology should be the thing now, we're still capitalism, but I don't think as much of a patriarchal society, although maybe still are, I suppose. As Ruth Bader Ginsburg said about the Supreme Court in the United States, she said that if everyone on the Supreme Court was a woman, and that was no surprise to you, then you might feel as if you were not in a patriarchal society. Whereas now it's sort of, there's one or two, but it was currently three. But anyways, the idea that we're not in a patriarchal society, I think is certainly the case that we are, but it's not as blatant as the 1950s. But that doesn't mean that ego psychology is like the thing we would want, because do we want to be reconciled with the status quo, the existing society? Also, is that, again, I always say this, like, is that the role of criticism? Is that the role of psychoanalysis, or is that the role of criticism? To just make the student feel like everything's good. I mean, I don't want to say no off the bat. Like, I actually do want to make students feel happy and feel, included in the world and feel good about where they are in the world. But I don't think my job is to do ego psychology for them and to just make it all feel like, okay, once you find your happy place, job done. That's not to say I want to just, disturb the student, or like displace the student, or make the student feel like there's trauma everywhere, and that's something that matters, or something like that. No, but I don't. But I get why I need to take both sides, and sort of do a little bit of like, okay, it's good to be who you are, and also a little bit of like, we should challenge who we are, and we should kind of disrupt our expectations of what it means to be us or to have a self. So we're going to need some tools to go against what we call ego psychology, or that version of Freud. Same thing with humanism. Like, should we just perpetuate humanistic values, or should we, in the humanities, should also kind of disturb what it means to be classical and humanistic thinking, being, and so on? Like, I actually do believe in humanistic values, and I believe in testing humanistic values and trying out other kinds of values that are not humanistic at the same time. And that sounds like real Freud to me, or real Lacan, to be able to do both. Finally, okay, yeah, so that was about ego psychology. And what does he replace it with? Well, you'll see it already in the mirror stage argument, but he replaces it with just, I think, a sense that the fractured self and the fractured ego is the real ego. Okay, and the ego version, the repaired ego, the ego cycle, like the stabilized kind of, the autonomous humanistic self of the ego psychology is actually the censored ego, or to some degree the repressed, or to some degree we might say the manifest. The manifest as opposed to the latent ego, which is sort of the split ego. Okay, so last other thing I'll just say is that I want you to think of Lacan as he's a generation after Freud. He sometimes says his work as a return to Freud, but let's consider Freud as like a modernist who is invested in interpretation, but is also invested in myth. He uses lots of mythic language from Oedipus on and so on, and believes in a kind of universality of stages of the psyche. That everyone's psyche goes through stages. And by the way, it's not a progression. It's like those stages are permanent in you, but you can go from like the primitive to the modern, or the again, belief in the animistic power of your thoughts, and you're constantly going through like these sort of prehistoric stages through the psyche, almost like this sort of like anthropological work that all the psyche is doing, and the sort of like mythic churning of what the psyche is. And it's obviously very literary, but it's somewhat romantic too. All these stages romanticize anthropology in terms of the power of myth and the power of mind and the power of story. Okay, Lacan is, I'm going to call a structuralist. He's also a post-structuralist too, if you want to look at Lacan. But anyways, what he's going to do is say that all this sort of mythical stage language of Freud, these are structures. Okay, so what Freud thought was myth is true, but it's true as structure. So the Oedipus complex is not a myth. It's a structure of subjectivity. Okay, and we can take out the mythic language. So the one hand, it becomes somewhat more scientific to call these structures, but Lacan is not just going to say, this is better science, because he's not that simplistic and he's not that dumb or annoying. He will say that it's also questioning exactly what the heck I would say even a structure is. I won't use it with science, but so we don't have to believe in the power of myth anymore, but we should believe in the power of structures, but that doesn't exactly tell us, it doesn't just solve anything, but it turns all this Freudian language into structural language. You'll see this happen, especially when talking about language. And in stages, even just to flash forward, like the Oedipal stages is going to turn into the mirror stage. And the mirror stage isn't so much a stage as it is a structure of the entire cycle. Okay, so you can just see this translated right away into this structuralist thinking that Lacan is using. Last point I would just say is that actually, are we in the word structuralist world anymore? You're familiar with the post-structuralists. Derrida's typically post-structuralist because he doesn't believe just the structure of language is as stable as it assumes. that structures are constantly being doubled or turned into these pharmacons with these endless kind of simultaneous contradictory effects and so on. To the degree that we've also moved beyond structural psychoanalysis, I mean, Lacan has some tools to get us beyond that even, but in the last 30, 40 years, there's other kinds of analysis. And we move on. So Freud was myth and stage. Lacan is structure and function, which is taken right out of Jakobson. All these things are functions in the mind, rather than like mythic kind of drives. Sometimes. Well, he still uses the word drive in it. But finally, in the contemporary, people will talk about positions, and then that the psyche is in positions. So if you're depressed, you're in a depressive position. It doesn't mean you're a depressed person. It doesn't mean so we're trying to demythologize to some extent, but also to recognize that a position means you can come in and out of it, even if you never really leave it. So maybe depression maybe never leaves us, although we can be less depressed than sometimes. We call that the depressive position. So it takes a little bit of Freud and a little bit of Lacan, but it gives it a little bit more variability. If it's Lacan, if it's a structure, it's always permanent, and it never really changes. If it's Freud, it's this mythic thing that is in sort of primal history, and it's ahistorical, and it's sort of permanent in that way. Well, if it's a position, you might come in and out of it, even if the position itself never goes away. Positions comes from actually Melanie Klein, but I think whether you say it's her or anybody else, it's more the standard, I think, in contemporary psychoanalysis, where people would analyze you, I think, with that flexibility in mind, that you're not just a walking research complex, or you're not just a walking structure. You can sort of come in and out, and there's change in history, variability, person-specific events, and that's why we might call that positions. I don't know. There's probably other words for it, but that's what I would call it. Okay, back to Lacan now. The mirror stage. Okay, I'll just read, or maybe I'll ask. I'll ask you while you read. First paragraphs here. I'll just stop you. Well, actually, we'll just read the first. Yeah, first two paragraphs. I'm reading the first paragraphs of your stage, right? Yeah. Okay. The conception of the mirror stage that I introduced at our last Congress 13 years ago has since become more or less established in the practice of the French group. However, I think it worthwhile to bring it again to your attention, especially today, for the light it sheds on the formation of the I as we experience it in psychoanalysis. It is an experience that leads us to oppose any philosophy directly issuing from the cogito. Cogito? Some of you may recall that this conception originated in a feature of human behavior illuminated by a fact of comparative psychology. The child, at an age when he is, for a time, however short, outdone by the chimpanzee in instrumental intelligence, and nevertheless already recognize as such his own image in a mirror. This recognition is indicated in the illuminative mimicry of the aha erlebnis, which Kohler sees as the expression of situational apperception, an essential stage of the act of intelligence. This act, far from exhausting itself, as in the case of the monkey, once the image has been mastered and found empty, immediately rebounds in the case of the child in a series of gestures in which he experiences in play the relation between the movements assumed in the image and the reflected environment, and between this virtual complex and the reality it reduplicates, the child's own body and the persons and things around him. Okay, alright, great, thanks. Okay, we'll stop there and I'll just ask, so wait, what is the mirror stage, or this sort of mirror moment? just describe how this actually seems to happen. The next paragraph tells us that it can happen between 6 months and 18 months in any given child. So the mirror stage is 1 to 10.
It's the moment in childhood development when a child recognizes that the image in the mirror is their own.
Exactly. Yeah, good. And supposedly chimpanzees cannot do this, or it's a little bit unclear. They can recognize themselves, but it doesn't seem to be. It says, okay, so this is a famous psychologist named Wolfgang Kohler that he's mentioning, who happens to be a huge influence on Franz Kafka of all people. So Kafka's fixed some of this language up in this incredible short story called The Porto Academy. Have you read that? Where it's this ape who's giving a speech to an academy, like it's at a university, it's like maybe, and talking all about what it's like to be an ape. Anyways, little side note. Okay, it's the same guy though, Kohler, that everyone's reading. And Kohler has discovered that it's actually, or chimpanzees can recognize themselves, but Lacan has pointed out that this actually turns into basically nothing but a monkey, as he says. And that he's not fascinated by it, whereas in Lacan's mind, the mirror moment, the mirror recognition is in fact very profound. It achieves this huge thing, all about this sense of image and selfhood and so on. And identification. So I'll skip around here and read some passages here. Paragraphs later he says, the whole thing discloses a libidinal dynamism, which has hitherto remained problematic, as well as an ontological structure of the human world that accords with my reflections on paranoid knowledge. We've only understood the mirror stage as an identification in the full sense that analysis gives to the term, namely the transformation that takes place in the subject when he assumes an image. And you get this Freudian term, the imago. You assume an image, but it's really actually sort of like a whole second complex or something in this mirror stage kind of thing. Then he goes on to say, next paragraph, that. Alright, so it says it seems to exhibit an exemplary situation. In an exemplary situation, the symbolic matrix in which the I is precipitated in a primordial form before it is objectified in the dialectic of identification with the other, or language restores to it in the universal function as subject. And next paragraph. There's a lot of technical psychoanalysis language here, a lot of technical behaviorist language going on here. So I don't know, I'm skipping most of it, but next paragraph he says, the important point is that this form situates the agency of the ego before its social determination in a fictional direction, which will always remain irreducible for the individual alone, or rather which will only rejoin the coming into being of the subject asymptotically. Okay, I'm going to pause there and just point things out here. My question was going to be what actually happens in this mirror moment? So the child is seeing him or herself in the mirror and recognizing that it's me, the I. And in behaviorism, like Kohler might be suggesting, it's just the scene of recognition. You see yourself in the mirror and you're like, oh, okay, I have a sense of self. I see that it's me, I even know it's just a reflection, it's not the second person in the mirror. When my cat looks at the mirror, I think the cat, I'm not sure. Because at first, the cat was like, wait, who's that? And the cat's like, oh, okay, this is no longer interesting. I see in the mirror, yes, there's something else. There's another cat there, or there's me. Either way, it's not fascinating. I don't know, maybe the cat has a mirror stage too. But the cat's just right in front of me.
Having a mirror stage.
I didn't see the cat.
Who knows if this applies to all animals, or all mammals, or if it just applies to humans, but anyways, Lacan is going to go on to say this is actually not the simple scene of recognition that it seems to be. And at first it's because it seems pretty obvious from what we read, although it's full of this compact language. He says it's the entrance into a symbolic matrix in which the I is precipitated in a primordial form. It's like you enter not just into your own personal recognition, you enter into this system which is self-recognition as such. That's what he's suggesting. to the degree that that system, which we call the symbolic matrix, exists, it existed before you. So we all enter through the mirror stage, whether we actually see the mirror or not. Totally irrelevant. You don't actually have to look at the mirror. Everyone in 6 months and 18 months will enter into the same system, the same structure of the psyche in which self-recognition will take place, but it won't be self-recognition like simply put. It'll be you sort of insert yourself into a system in which self-recognition occurs. That's called the symbolic matrix. I'm not going to go on and on about like Lacan has the difference between the imaginary, the symbolic, and the real. It's not that important even for us unless you become a crack Lacanian psychoanalyst theorist, and then it'll be important for you. Just that even all three of those pre-exist you and your own recognition. So they're all three structures that pre-exist you. And you sort of insert yourself into them. And that's what the mirror stage really is. You inserting yourself into the symbolic
I was laying down.
that precedes you. And if that's the case, he says this form, which I read, situates the agency of the ego before social determination. So before even the ego decides who it's going to be, or what kind of social role it will take, or what society even will decide of the ego, of that baby. The baby has to have a sense of self, a sense of the symbolic. And that, like, the baby gets agency, but only because you enter in the structure which was before you, which you didn't get to choose. Sort of, it's not an agential entrance. And that's the mirror stage. It's sort of, you're going to get a self, you're going to get an agency, but also recognize that you don't have full control of that agency, or you're sort of, you had to like, kind of fit the structure, or the structure precedes you. It's the structure that has the agency, as much as you do. And just to flash to the next essay where he says it's called the agency of the letter in the unconscious. It's the language or the letter that will have the agency as much as you will. That's structuralist thinking right there. Structures have agency as much as individuals do. And this gets away from the ego psychology. Instead of that individual, like almost narcissistic view of yourself, recapture yourself and become self-made, self-maker, star of your own life. Lacanian psychoanalysis is like, structures do shape you, and they are the agents just as much as you are. Maybe even more, I don't know. How hardcore you are in the structure. Okay. So far so good, I hope. Next paragraph, he says, the fact is that the total form of the body by which the subject anticipates in a mirage the maturation of his power is given to him only as gestalt. And that's a lot of psychoanalytic jargon. Not that important. Gestalt is sort of a sense of the whole or sense of the self. So let's skip a little bit here. He says, thus this gestalt, skipping a little bit, says, by these two aspects of its appearance, it symbolizes the mental permanence of the I, at the same time as it prefigures its alienating destination. It is still pregnant with correspondences that unite the I, right, so it makes sense of the self, a unified sense of the self, unites the I, with the statue in which man projects himself, with the phantoms that dominate him, or with the automaton in which the ambiguous relation of the world of his own making, hence upon completion. The next paragraph talks about the doubling, the hallucination. There's a lot of technical stuff. I don't think it's that important that we leave on it. I just wanted to really stop with that word alienation. Alienating destination in a sense. And I think it's a key term in there. And I'll give you some other examples. So a few more paragraphs later, he says, I am led therefore to regard the function of the mirror stage as a case of the function of the imago, which is established relation between organism and reality, organism in the world and outside world. Man, however, this relation to nature is altered by a certain deus, would be like cutting or splitting, at the heart of the organism, primal discord, betrayed by the signs of uneasiness and order of coordination. I think that's enough of that language. I'm just going to ask you, can you digest a little bit of this and tell me, what does he mean by alienation or discord? Why is this in the mirror stage? What's going on here? I'll set you up again by saying, okay, ego psychology thinks deep down you have a kind of primal oneness in yourself. This is a very humanistic tenet. It sounds like Jungian criticism. Also, remember the unity of the work of art.
I'm thinking.
Lacan has pointed out that in the mirror stage, it's just an alienating destination. He also calls it a primal discord. Dehiscence.
I think we can do it. Just raise my hand.
What's going on here?
Can I answer?
Oh, alright. Okay.
Go ahead, you go first.
I'm sorry, I didn't. Should I? You can go first.
No, it's like, I don't know what the hand up is. That looks like a hand up. It's actually clumping. So.
Okay, so this is the nailer code.
Okay, so what I'm thinking when he says like alienating destination, I think it's because in like the ego psychology, it's like based on you and like what you're saying, like there's a wholeness in oneself. But whereas this one, when he talks about like recognition through, you come to like recognize yourself, but then also recognize that other people are recognizing you, and it kind of like really makes you, I think maybe you become aware of like differences and you're alienated from other people. So instead of being a whole with oneself, it's like you're a part of like this bigger thing, and you recognize that within this structure you're like there's difference between all of the different parts.
Yeah, very good, very good. You're putting the pieces together well. I'll add to them in just a second, but I want to hear also from you, Lou.
So I feel like what he's trying to say is that although you recognize your image in the mirror, but at the same time you know that this image is not really you. So there is always going to be a gap between the image that you see and your sense of the self. So although the mirror is helping you to see yourself as this individual, as something that is detached from other things that are surrounding you, but at the same time it is telling you that to see yourself, you need to see yourself as an other inside a mirror.
Yeah.
And so this is somehow the start of this, what he calls like this fictive image of yourself, something that is never going to be the truth, the thing in itself, only an image of the self. And this is where the alienation or this kind of gap begins.
Exactly, yeah. Okay, nicely said, both of you. Yeah, absolutely. So you identify with this imaginary whole self, which you can only see by looking beyond yourself at this mirror. And you don't figure out what's in the mirror. Second is that you only get that whole self by sort of inserting yourself into a symbolic matrix, which isn't you, which doesn't come from you. It pre-exists you. So you're not inserting yourself in that thing that pre-exists you. Third, he says even before you meet other people.
What me?
Might be redoubled even when it's just between you and yourself. You and that self.
No, close.
The only way to understand yourself is through that basically alienation process. Recognizing yourself, but knowing that that's not exactly you. He also refers that to the fragmented body, and again, you have to pass through this symbolic matrix, pass through this non-you to get to the you, or this image of you to get to the you, or this doubling of you to get to the you. And another word for that process is going to be called méconnaissance. You have that at the end of this essay. It's interesting because he's very technical in this essay. I do enjoy reading this essay. And he says, okay, so if you think about Freud might have argued that we have something called primary narcissism. And deep down, where does all this stuff come from? All this it's because you love yourself. You're primarily narcissist. We're all Freud actually has experience with the second thing called the death trap. So you have a primary narcissism and a primary counterpart of that, which is sort of like primary self-destruction. Well, this is not exactly through the death trap, but this is sort of saying that the primary narcissism isn't the only thing going on there. Though he does actually say that in like paragraph here, but we won't get too technical. He just says that you would have a second primary thing. That second primary thing, I would call it primary alienation. Is the right way to put it. So you primarily you have a primary investment in yourself, and strangely enough, you have a primary investment in your sort of self-alienation or self-doubling or self-misrecognition, méconnaissance. He said there's that philosophy grasps that negativity only within the limits of the self-sufficiency of consciousness. Right? You think he's running into this problem all the time, especially existentialism. They always want to get back to the restored self, the ego with all of its capabilities, whether that's Descartes or whether that's Jean-Paul Sartre or even like this idea that this whole self is going to be recovered after going through all these problems. He says no, the primary self is that split self, that self that doesn't fully recognize itself, the méconnaissance that constitutes the ego, the illusion of autonomy. Because remember, it's illusion because you didn't invent the structure, you didn't invent the symbolic matrix, and so on, or the alienating process. You had to insert yourself in there. And then he goes on to talk about some other implications of that. Okay, so let's pause here and just make stock of this interesting essay. And one could say that there's sort of like this otherness that is embedded in the self from the get-go. This, whether that be other individuals or whether that be other structures. That's part of the mirror stage. Just this sort of insertion of yourself into this matrix of otherness, of others and otherness. Its second implications is that I think, again, this primary narcissism, primary alienation thing is really powerful. Because it tells us almost all we need to know about the whole purpose of analysis and also almost the whole purpose of selfhood and I want to say the whole purpose of interpretation. So what if interpretation is to not recover a primary wholeness, to recognize a primary misrecognition or a primary alienation, then analysis has to sort of be okay with that, primary otherness, if you will. That primary, difference in the self. That's the way I might say it. Another word it might also be, you can also call it primary trauma. But anyways, analysis won't just be about repair and recovery and so on. It will also be about recognizing the split, recognizing the difference, recognizing negation, recognizing alienation. And that's radically powerful. Let me give an example. Let me give a couple giant sort of psychoanalytic cultural examples. Let's say those who believe in God. They believe in God. Why? Freud argued even back in the day that it was sort of a form of belief in a primary unity. Everything is one, or we're all together with God, or something like that. Where there's a primary wholeness in the universe. And Freud thought that was an illusion, that there is no true unity. But Lacan, he doesn't really care. Lacan actually is interesting. He's a Catholic in many ways. But his point would just be like, you can actually put this within religion and just say, maybe religion is recognizing of the primary gap between you and God. The primary loss of wholeness, the primary loss of unity. Maybe that's what true religion is. Maybe it's the double, the desire for primary unity and the recognition of primary lack or difference or negativity or alienation. I don't know. It could be both. But if you're a true Lacanian, you would recognize that any desire for primary unity or reparativity or non-alienation is problematic, is incorrect, is untrue, essentially. So religion, if it is indeed primary non-alienation, it's incorrect. But you can decide on your own if that's the case. But let me give you another example. I think everyday life is structured very Lacanian-wise. Because everyday life is very capitalistic, and what does capitalism always promise you? A little bit more of finding yourself. Buy this, you'll find yourself. Or watch this show, you'll have self-discovery. You'll sort of get a moment for yourself, or maybe it's your partner, who knows. But anyways, you get less alienation. Buy this, you'll be less alienated. Watch this, you'll be less alienated. Okay, you'll have some moment of self-recovery.
Do you usually paper?
Of course, capitalism is the most alienating thing because you have to do this over again. Okay? You'll actually never be done. You have to keep on. fact, it gives you alienation over and over again. So it's just this Lacanian machine, basically, capitalism. I think, by the way, you could say the same thing about God. You could say the same thing about anything that is fitting this idea that it's going to not alienate you if you just believe in it. Okay? Some people even say, like, oh, ego criticism is the same thing. If you believe in, like, the restoration of nature, or the recovery of a pastoral self, the kind of fusion of the self and the good nature and the green nature, and you believe in a kind of unity aspiration thing. Whereas psychoanalysis, Lacan will show you that that's a form of primary narcissism. There's also primary alienation. It never goes away. And that there's always a split between you and nature, or there's always an non-satisfactory thing or lack that you never resolve. And I think that's utterly profound, basically. I just think it's super brilliant. It does help us understand Freud a bit better, but it obviously understands the whole of who we are, the whole culture, and everything from God to capitalism to nature. The most obvious thing is that it helps us understand literature. Literature is not just about primary fusion. It's also about primary alienation or difference or changing of the self, let's say. We're okay with that, especially as critics. Like we don't want just students to say, "Oh, there's you in the text. Choose you in the text." We also want them to take a little distance and say, "Wait, this may not be you, or you may be different, or it may change you, or just it doesn't always have to be your world. Shakespeare's world doesn't have to just be you. It's all about you." And also that even the characters in Shakespeare, they don't resolve their alienation systems either, or existence either. So it's okay to accept some degree of alienation. And that's just because I think politically very radical, aesthetically very radical, politically radical, psychoanalytically radical. It means, okay, so deep down I think this is also an explanation of left and right politics. And I'll just take Trump as an example. Trump is always, number one, I can solve everything. Vote for me, it'll all work out. But any form of authoritarianism is always like, you just need to believe in these stable things. Family, God. You just need to, these are unshakable. They are true forever. And you don't ever need to question them. Just believe in them, believe in me, vote for me, it'll all answer itself. You'll not have any more alienation and so on. Oh, and by the way, those who don't believe in that, they are the aliens. They're the ones who are bothering us. They're the ones who we can get rid of. But alienation is on the other. You, deep down in yourself, confused with these stable, permanent values, these truths, these forms of logos, if you're going to use some archaic language, and so on. And that's all you have to do, problem solved. Okay? Well, of course, that is modeled on this sense of, exclusion of some people, so it's not radically democratic. It's self-interested. It's not universal, and it's a form of primary narcissism. And who best demonstrates that would be obviously Trump. Whereas true leftism is saying, number one, we're all included. Okay, so true democracy, true universalism. But second, we're truly all included because we're all to some degree alien to ourselves, to each other, and so on. Alienation won't go away. Even if you vote for the left, whoever that is, I don't know, maybe it's Donald Trump. Yeah. But maybe, who knows? It's whoever you vote for, I don't care. But the point is that the left should know better that it's not about vote for me and all gets resolved, but that it means voting for the left means actually recognizing alienation as the thing we have in common, the thing we do share, right? The thing that's primary to all of us. And if we do share it, then it's not so alienating maybe in that way. It's not so threatening, that's for sure. Everyone belongs because we're all alienated. And in fact, because no one belongs. No one belongs to themselves entirely, no one belongs to any structures don't really are consistent. Another way of saying it too is like we saw Derrida deconstruct all forms of logos. It's not stable, not fixed, not platonic. And anyone who walks around and says, "Oh, I'm going to fix it for you. It'll be just like this. This is the meaning of everything. It's stabilized by these patriarchal values or God, family, country." Well, maybe you don't have believe in God. Maybe you don't have that family structure. Maybe you're displaced from your country, or you just don't identify with it for various reasons. Maybe it's colonialist, who knows? Fine. The left doesn't care about that because the universal values are not these arbitrary stable values. They are the value that we are all in it together in terms of interpretation, or in terms of working through alienation together. And it never goes away. The only subject we have is both fragmented and, okay, as well as sort of has primary tendencies to want to not be fragmented, to seek primary actions, as people call it. Okay, that's it. That's basically the mirror stage. I know I kind of rattled on there, but anyways, I think it's pretty damn powerful. Pretty damn explanatory. Maybe the last thing is as literary theorists, is our job to, when you're theorizing a text, are you achieving a kind of fusion with it, or are you achieving a kind of sitting with the alienation issues in it? I think we're probably doing both. It sounds like we're Lacanian. Okay, last little Lacanian chunk. We don't have a huge amount of time here, so this is obviously going to be speed reading! I don't think I'm even going to get to the last text, which was Adam Phillips, the genius. Anyways, Lacan, agency of the letter. There's no need to spend a lot of time on this, but it's a lot of Saussure, a lot of Jacobson, worked through some Freud. Lacan has this famous phrase where he says, the unconscious is structured like a language. And I'm going to get to that sentence in just a second. But just to build on to it, what is the structure of language? Basically, he's going to spend a lot of time dealing with it. And he's interested in, not just this, he says the whole structure in the first sentence. The unconscious is the whole structure of language, including the literality of the letter, the materiality of the letter. That's really just the sign, the Saussurian sign. Okay, so then he talks about the Saussurian sign. We all know it's arbitrary. He gives us the big S over the little s. And I'm not going to get into his little diagrams. It's not that important. He says that the interesting thing about this is not really the arbitrariness at all. And then he tries to get into some interesting complexities. It's always fun with Saussure because we spend all the time showing how all the extensions actually seems to sort of make this arbitrary argument fall apart. Okay, well, in Lacan, he goes into the diagram of the tree, the word tree over the picture tree. He comes back to that later on, but then he goes to a second diagram. He doesn't even explain first, but then the second diagram. Ladies and gentlemen, so one icon, single icon, or single image, or single signifier, but two signifiers, ladies and gentlemen. Okay? So you can either have one signifier and let's say multiple signifiers, or you can have it the opposite. One signifier, multiple signifiers. Anyways, in this case, in this image, we have one signifier, multiple signifiers, or two signifiers, split signification. He goes on to say that this is what he says in this definition of this, where we see that without greatly expanding the scope of the signifier concerning the experiment, that is, by doubling the noun through the mere juxtaposition of two terms whose complementary meanings ought to apparently reinforce each other, a surprise is produced by unexpected precipitation of an unexpected meeting. The image of twin doors symbolizes the solitary confinement of the Western man for the satisfaction of his natural pursuit away from home. The imperative that he seems to share with the good direction of the meaning of the most troubled by is subject to the laws of urinary segregation. Okay, a lot of jargon there, but I'm not going to I'm not going to ask you questions. If I had more time, I'd just say what that is. I'll just point out, even I think the footnote points out, it's just like sexual difference is embedded in language, precedes signified. Okay, so just like Saussure said, arbitrariness, difference, preceded any particular sign. So that was the structure of language. Well, Lacan is going to add to it. How might he be doing this? First of all, by saying that language is embodied. Okay, so everyone comes to language not as this sort of pure communicative thing, but the bodies talking to each other. We talked about this earlier. What are bodies? Are they primarily sexually different? I don't know. But that's one theory of sex. We'll get into others down the road. Were they primarily sexually different, defined by sexual difference? Thus, that precedes whatever particular signifier you use. And the example being the same door, but different but sexual difference structures that same signifier. So just like the structure of language precedes any use of it, sexual difference precedes any signified. This is a simple sort of Lacanian take on this. He develops all sorts of other arguments out of this, but if you go on to read this, it's full of bizarrities and little in-jokes, technical language. So this is basically the next kind of main thing I wanted us to talk about. If you go on to read some of this, some of it's really technical, some of it's really hard to read, then some of it's jokes. Some of it's like literary references, some of it's like little philosophy stuff, some of it's random other references. And, for example, I will read this thing here. It's probably like 2 or 3 pages after that image. Here it says, let's look at the word tree again. This time not as nicely written out, but as the point of one of these punctuations, and see how it crosses the bar of the Caesarean algorithm. Excuse me. For even broken down the double specter of its vowels and consonants, we're talking about the word tree here, okay? It can still be called out with the rover and the plane tree. The significations it takes on in the context of our flora, strength and majesty. Drawing on all the symbolic context suggested in the Hebrew of the Bible, it erects on the barren hill the shadow of the cross, and reduces the capital to the Y, the sign of dichotomy, which, except for the illustration used by heraldry, would owe nothing to the tree, however geological may think it. Circulatory tree, tree of life, cerebellum, tree of Saturn, Dionysus was formed in tree, blah 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 blah. And then he goes on to quote Paul Valéry. No, says the tree. It says no. In the shower of sparks, in the superb head. And so on and so forth. What the hell is going on here?
Just the way you said it.
Some technical stuff, Saussure, even Freud, interstage, made sense. And then that stuff. All of this rambling. Is he lost his way? Is this pointless? Is this silly? Or is this just really just difficult? Yes, all the above. Might there be a reason for what he's doing? Who knows what the hell he's really saying? I'm not going to spend time unpacking every reference. I think it does make sense if you really try it. But he doesn't care whether you get all the references. Like, the fact that we have footnotes helps us. Can you imagine him saying this with a page? He rarely wrote down his. Why is he doing this? Anyone here, man? Shot it, Sarah, jump in.
So I think, like the comparison he's making, like right before that he's talking about words that have meaning because they follow after each other, right? And then what he's saying now is that on top of that there's like another level at which words have meaning, which is basically connotation. Like to say tree has all of these extra connotations that like affect the meaning that we put on it and how what we understand a tree to be.
Yeah. A lot of those connotations could be biblical or literary or historical. They can also be, or symbolic, whatever that giant word means. They can also be puns, plays on language, anagrams, so on and so forth. Just before that, he does say all words are polyphonous, plural in meaning, or determinist, for instance. You use the word connotations, right, which calls us back to that denotation connotation or latent manifest distinction. Okay, so far so good. Anyone else want to take on what's going on with Lacanian style or Lacanian words? Remember this essay is about the agency of the letter in the unconscious. He's showing us a bunch of words, and he showed us the Caesarean stuff, which we more or less can understand. And it spins out in all this sort of riffing. Why is this style doing this? Why is he doing all this? So yes, Sher's right. There's this connotation to everything. Way too stuff.
Well, just on like his like style and riffing, if we are gonna say that like the mind is structured like a language in the sense that there's all of these offshoots of meaning, like he's just sort of bringing everything together. And he's demonstrating like the network nature of not only language but the psyche itself. He's just bringing in all of these like tangential connections through references to try to make his point of the structure, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. Showing us the structure of language. And I think it's not just Saussurean structures that he's showing us, but the agency of the language. Language itself has all these riffs built into it, and all these references, and all these symbolic weight, symbolic saturation stuff going on. That's also the agency of the letter. To the degree that he's a structuralist, you can already see it in this essay where he's like, yes, Saussure is right, and by the way, there's other structures, including gender, sexual difference, but also even punning, exactly the Saussure, the name Saussure, which I'm sure Lacan used. And which is that's also the agency of the letter. Okay, and it's also in the unconscious. So analysis would be, as we know from Lacan, it's not just to sort of solve the problem. It's actually to sort of stay with the problem, stay with the trouble, you might say, to demonstrate it, perform it. He's both analyzing language and performing language in this argument. He's performing his own argument, just like Freud did with the uncanny. Perform the uncanny, and we'll talk about the uncanny. And Lacan is showing us the agency of the letter in this essay on the agency of the letter, showing how he just can't stop riffing. He can't stop referring to all sorts of random things that come to his mind when he's talking about truth. And so the style is sort of speaking through him. The agency of the letter is speaking through his ideas, as much as he's also trying to explain it and understand it. And yeah, so the unconscious is sort of speaking through him. That's part of what he wants to show. That he's not even fully in control of it to some degree, because that's his whole point. We're never fully in control. It's not ego stuff. It's not primary narcissism. It's primarily alienation. He does it in a fun way, in a playful way, or maybe an annoying way, in an extremely difficult way, very technical way sometimes. But he uses a lot of metaphor. Well, it's metaphor metonymy, a lot of displacement and condensation. He's using Freudian techniques, displacement and condensation, to show you the agency of the letter, which is full of displacement and condensation. So it's super clever. Yeah, so I mean, I agree with everyone when I was saying the chat. And I know we're pretty much running out of time here. I just remember when I was a graduate student, and I looked at these talks, because Lacan was the thing in the 90s. I know, so this will date me. I'll am, but although technically I was in grad school. So in the 90s and 2000s, I would hear everyone sort of doing their Lacanian thing. Oh, I'm going to look at it reading this film or this new text, and they would just spin all these crazy puns and references and jargon, and it was so much. I hate Lacanian. Like, this is really annoying. It did not hit my unconscious. And where to be more generous, I would say, okay, that was their unconscious and their agency of the letter, and they were jamming on it. And why not? Enjoy it. As Lacan's way to say, enjoy that symptom. But I thought it was annoying. But on the other hand, I get why I would want to do it. It's an act of mimicry, and I know ideation of Lacan, but which shouldn't be done. But on the other hand, it's kind of, you have to do it if you believe in this Lacanian system, which I do. And I do believe in the mind, and I do believe in the random reference, and I do believe in symbolic and oversaturation and overdetermination and so on. So there you go. Lacan is super difficult, but also super fascinating, super fun, and super explanatory. Like, it's just so much going on, and it's just incredible. I'm a total amateur when it comes to Lacan. Alright, finally, we have this other reading, which I'm not even going to add films. The truth is that it was super pleasurable. I think, first of all, to see Adam Phillips go at it. He's still alive. He was an English major, then he became an analyst. You can see him doing that. You can see how much pleasure he has in saying, what's going on with the connection of poetry and psychoanalysis? Freud loves to talk about use poetry, and this is evidence. And we talked about how poetry is condensation and displacement, so it's dream works, so it's psychoanalysis, so on and so forth. But psychoanalysis often idealizes poetry, as if it's always the language. So this is just me summing it up. And also, it sort of de-distorts those poems. It's actually not that good of a reader of poetry, Freud, and psychoanalysis. If you de-historicize, decontextualize, idealize poems, you're not really getting that much out of it. On the other hand, you can do what you want. You're the psychoanalyst. you're the critic. If you want to idealize, go ahead. I don't care. And I do idealize. I do idealize. So there. But he talks about a little bit more about how psychoanalysis should always raise. He's like, it's funny that psychoanalysis has this idealization at the moment when literature doesn't even know what it is anymore. In the English department at university, he's totally spot on. He's the nail on the head there. It's like, we've been deconstructing literature. We're actually questioning it. So psychoanalysis thinks that it's going to be this ideal thing that resolves all your questions. No, not going to happen. If you're going to treat it in the ideal that way, you're going to miss what all the controversy and all the sort of fun about poetry is. But finally, they do kind of meet at some point. This is my last point, which is that they believe that if there's something good about, we'll just say, re-ingrained with language. It doesn't need to be ego psychology or reparative, but it just means we believe in the goodness of staying with the language. Psychoanalysis believes that, poetry believes that. Maybe it truly is. If do you think deep down that is true? Even if it's alienating, that's actually a form of healing. And that Phillips is pointing to that, and that instead of idealizing poetry, just use it to, like, poetry actually should undercut a lot of your idealizations of it. When you actually read it, it never just tells you, oh, things are really going to be great, language is going to be great, you're just going to get every meaning you want out of everything. No, it never tells you that. So that's the more, like, sort of